Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Well, hello there. We're counting down to me no longer being right here with you, Morgan. I mean, I'm getting bigger and bigger.
Won't be long. Getting ready to pop.
I'm so happy to be here today, as always, every Monday with the star of the show, Morgan Streetman, with our good buddy, Pat George. I'm Roxanne Wilder. And, you know, it was kind of nice, I must admit, to have that 4-day break for a multitude of reasons.
Oh, nice.
It was wonderful. But it is funny how 4 good nights of sleep are undone by 1 bad night, which happened last night, and back to the grind. But not hearing about all the impeachment stuff all the time.
Yeah.
But we are going to pick it up there. And I don't mind hearing about it from Morgan Streetman because he breaks it down in a way that it's, when I hear other news providers talk about it, it just sounds like Charlie Brown noise to me. Wah, 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 wah.
Yeah.
So,
well, you hear the same things over and over and over again from what I'm calling the usual suspects. You know, CNN, MSNBC, all of the major networks, the New York Times and others, and nobody seems to be telling the story, at least the way that I'm viewing it. Now, I'm hoping the folks that are listening are aligned with sort of the way that I'm viewing things, and they understand at least where I'm coming from. And maybe they feel sort of the same way about it. And, certainly if you have something to say about this impeachment witch hunt, please feel free to give us a call at 888-404-1010 because we'd love to hear from you. But, there's a few things that come to mind about the impeachment. And that is, I don't know if you got a chance to watch most of the proceedings, the Star Chamber proceedings, and then they switched, remember, and they had the public proceedings. And the Star Chamber proceedings were largely secret. We don't even have all those transcripts, and apparently not all of those transcripts came out so favorably, and so they were selectively leaked from the basement proceedings, the secret proceedings that Adam Schiff was conducting for a certain period of time. He selectively leaked certain things, and it's a lot of innuendo that he leaked.
Why aren't they putting him up to ask questions?
Well, they want to do that. The
Yeah,
Republicans want to do that. And, if you think back to the Bill Clinton impeachment, Ken Starr, who was the lead prosecutor in that, it was the special counsel in that, or independent counsel is what they called him at that time, he actually testified about it and about his investigation and what his findings were. Now, Adam Schiff has even said that he is acting like a special prosecutor in this case. But he doesn't want to come testify. And if you listen to some of the things he said, you'll know if the Republicans are taking this seriously by whether or not they try to ask me to testify. And if they try to ask me to testify, they're not taking anything seriously. Well, that just doesn't match the model of the previous impeachment. And more importantly, I think, is what happened before the alleged whistleblower, and he's not a whistleblower, he's a weaponized leaker. What happened before he filled out that whistleblower form? Now, there's been a lot said about what kind of protections the whistleblower gets, and I think it's been generally overstated by the Democrats in Congress. They say things like he's entitled to anonymity from all sources. That's just not true. He's entitled to anonymity from the Inspector General for the intelligence community, but he's not entitled to anonymity if he gets discovered by other means. And certainly even the New York Times has given out enough details that people were able to identify who the whistleblower is. And he's been named repeatedly. Although you've got major news organizations, you've got Facebook and others who are blocking content that actually names the whistleblower. Now, we don't know for sure that he's the guy, but certainly nothing has come out to prove that it's anybody else or to disprove that it's this guy, Ciaramella, that they've talked about, and has been named on Fox News and was first, I think, publicly named in widespread accounts by Real Clear Politics and the very fine reporter Paul Sperry, who used to be with Investors Business Daily. He's done an excellent job in his investigations, Real Clear Investigations, and he does excellent reporting. And he's the one who first sort of publicly named who the alleged whistleblower is. Now, again, we don't have confirmation, but of course, Paul Sperry didn't stop there. He went back and actually looked at this guy's social media accounts and saw that shortly after the whistleblower complaint was filed, things started being pulled out of the social media accounts to sort of make this guy a little bit of a ghost on the internet so that you wouldn't be able to discover all that much information about him. Now, to my way of thinking, isn't he a crucial witness? I mean, don't you have the right under the Sixth Amendment to confront your accusers? I mean, he's the primary accuser. But more importantly, the things that we've seen have totally eviscerated his complaint. I mean, he was making a complaint based on second or third-hand information, which we think he got from that guy, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, the guy who refused to be called Mr. Vindman, the military officer who never wears his military uniform except when he comes to testify in Congress. And then when Congressman Nunes says Mr. Vindman, which I don't think he meant intentionally as an insult or anything. I think he was just speaking as a matter of course. He says, Mr. Vindman, and the guy says, ranking member, it's Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. What a jerk. I mean, do you know the fact that the civil government controls the military in our country? The military is not in charge. They are not in charge of the civilian government. They don't get to tell the civilian leadership what to do. Now, granted, I believe in giving respect to people, and he certainly is deserving of respect. But if you watch that clip, in my opinion, there was absolutely no disrespect meant in that way by Devin Nunes. And if you read a book, which I've been reading, I got about halfway through it over the break, and that's The Plot Against the President. This is a fascinating book. It was written by Lee Smith. And if you're interested in this stuff, the granular detail of it, I recommend you go out and get this book and read it. Because what you'll learn is this plot that's been going on the entire time President Trump has been president, and it started even before he was president with the insurance policy. Remember, that was discussed in Andy's office. This is basically a plot cooked up by a very small group of people within our intelligence community, including FBI and CIA folks. Mainly, though, it looks like the FBI was the one that was most heavily involved under James Comey and Andrew McCabe. And these guys cooked up a plot to try to take down a president. Now, this was also run out of the White House. The president, Obama, apparently wanted to know everything that was going on and actually tried to set the incoming administration, President Trump's administration, up for failure when they took over, which is pretty offensive. I mean, we really, look, I remember when, Bill Clinton left office and they took all the W's out of the keyboards, if you remember that, because President George W. Bush was coming in. So as an insult, they removed all the little W keys out of the keyboards. Okay. All right. So that is just being a jerk. That's just being childish. But okay, they did that. But that doesn't go anywhere near the extent of what we saw President Obama try to do to the incoming administration of President Trump.
They took the T's, the R's, the U. They took all.
Well, no, they set them up with a soft coup. It began with this whole.
They put glue on the T, the R, the U, and it just made a big mess. Yeah.
One of the things that, is meaningful to me is you look into the whistleblower's attorney. Now, that's a fact we do know. That's a guy named Mark Zaid. And we've talked about him before on this show and some of his crazy tweets. But I want to read to you a tweet from January 30th of 2017 from his account. And this is still up because I've retweeted it recently. So you can find this still in his feed. And he is retweeting Jake Tapper saying that the president had just fired Acting Attorney General Sally Yates for refusing to enforce a legal order designed to protect the citizens of the U.S. Remember the travel ban? Remember what a big deal that was at the beginning? And she said she would not enforce the order. I mean, the insubordination from these people is just shocking. And they expect to be able to keep their jobs when they're insubordinate like that? I mean, who do you think is the president now? Well, obviously, they don't think that the Trump administration is legitimate, and they'll do anything they have to do to undermine it. But let me read you Mark Zaid's tweet. He says, January 30th of 2017, this is the lawyer for the whistleblower. He says, hashtag, see, I'm showing my age now. Hashtag coup has started. First of many steps. Hashtag rebellion. Hashtag impeachment will follow ultimately. Hashtag lawyers. That last one there just kind of makes me laugh. Hashtag lawyers. Watch out for the lawyers. But, listen to him. The coup has started. It's the first of many steps. This is a rebellion. The impeachment will follow ultimately. So they've been planning for this whole thing since the very first day, since the very moment President Trump assumed office. They've been working on this coup plot.
Makes me sick to my stomach to hear that.
And why don't we have this whistleblower brought in and ask a few questions? And also, when did you contact Congressman Schiff's office? Because, it's been disclosed, and he even changed the form after he signed it and filed it because he lied on it initially and said he didn't have any contact with anybody ahead of time. He then had to go back and amend the form to acknowledge that he did have contact with Congressman Schiff's office before filing the form, but he said, but it was non-substantive contact. Oh, I'm sure. It was non-substantive. You know what? They probably didn't even talk about it. They're probably talking about their grandkids, right? Just like Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch on the tarmac, right? They were talking about nothing, right? It wasn't anything important. Are you silly? Are you crazy? We'll be right back.
We're back on the Morgan Streetman Show. Roxanne Wilder, Pat George here as well, and love for you to be part of the program, 888-404-1010. And Morgan, one thing I like how you do this impeachment, and you run us through everything, but I almost need a visual. So if you could do if we could get a chalkboard in here and you could sketch it out for me, the timeline.
Wouldn't that be cool?
It's clearer than what you've just explained in the last 15 minutes. Has clarified things more for me than the headlines that I grab from various news sources.
Yeah. Well, the headlines are designed to make you think about things a certain way. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just like, remember the Project Veritas sting on CNN where they had a whistleblower at CNN who said, hey, things at CNN are highly biased. I mean, and it's coming from the top because this is a corporation. This is a corporate structure. So, top down editorializing, and the message is coming from Jeff Zucker that I want impeachment, the number one story, all the time. And what they're trying to do, in my opinion, is the old propaganda technique. You just keep repeating a lie, and, the old phrasing, a lie repeated often enough becomes the truth. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're trying to do. They keep repeating this lie. It's just like they keep repeating that there was a quid pro quo, even though none of the witnesses actually said they had direct knowledge of a quid pro quo. Several of them, including Ambassador Sondland, who's no major friend of President Trump, if you look at his donation history and what he did prior to President Trump being elected, he refused to donate or participate in President Trump's campaign financially. And vocally. It's not just that he didn't donate. He literally did not want to be associated with it. He was a never-Trumper. He was a Jeb Bush guy. And it was only after President Trump had won the election that he came with this big donation of $1 million. And that's a clue, folks, as to what you need to do to become an ambassador, obviously. Come in with a major donation to the inauguration committee for the big party that they had. And then you can be ambassador to the EU, I guess. And that in and of itself is kind of sad. That's how our ambassadors probably get mostly picked, is who donated a lot of money and who's politically useful. But, they never got out of any of the witnesses any direct testimony that there was a quid pro quo. And, there's so much depth to this that I think it's worth kind of focusing on for a minute here. Now, we do want to cover with you some of the upcoming stuff having to do with the impeachment. But let me just stop for a second and talk about the fact that, think about this. They say the quid pro quo was one. You want to have a meeting at the White House, you want to have a meeting with President Trump, you have to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden. And we'll get to Joe Biden, too, by the way, because, he doesn't stop making silly gaffes, including biting at his wife's finger. I don't know if you saw that. He introduced a new campaign slogan this past weekend. His new campaign slogan is "No Malarkey." No malarkey, not from Joe Biden. Yeah, that guy's full of malarkey. His whole life is malarkey. But nevertheless,
that's such a current sounding expression.
Yeah, malarkey.
Something they'll
everybody uses
go
that
with
word.
on their
I'll show you.
talkie radio show or
That's right. It's a throwback to the 1920s. Anyway, his wife, Dr. Jill, she's introducing him, and she's kind of waving her arms around. Not gesticulating wildly, but she's just waving her arms around. And he happens to be standing sort of behind her. This is a funny video. You got to go out there and watch this if you got some time. And she puts her hand sort of in front of his face. Now she doesn't know she's doing it, and he leans over and bites her finger. It's just kind of I think he is suffering from the early stages of, what we might call mild cognitive impairment. I don't know.
I have a different theory, Morgan.
Okay.
I believe that, well, if you clicked on some of the headlines over the last couple of days related to his son, I think he's just trying to outdo his son, like to do something so wacky and quirky that no one's going to be interested in clicking on that story about old Hunter and, his predilection for, we're not going to go into this as a family show in a strip club in New York.
Oh, goodness.
So maybe he's trying to deflect. Maybe he's trying to say, hey, look at me. Don't look at those headlines about my son.
There are a lot of headlines about his son that, the guy obviously has major issues, right? I mean, we can't even get into it, but, his brother's widow, he was with her, and at the same time, he's fathered a child with someone in Arkansas. Now he's remarried. I mean, the guy is just an absolute train wreck. But, this to me is one of the fundamental points, and I think this will help you see through the fog. Now, we've heard that what President Trump tried to do with Ukraine, and remember, first it was 2.5 years of Russia, collusion conspiracy. And that was all we heard. And then they couldn't establish that. They couldn't prove that. In fact, they knew very early on, they knew in like January of 2017 that there was really no there. But then I think they maybe took until the end of that year, and then they were sure by December that there was absolutely no collusion, no conspiracy. But they kept that lie going, and they drug that out all the way until earlier this year when Bob Mueller testified before Congress and, kind of was a disaster, frankly. Didn't even seem to know what was in his report. Didn't even know who Fusion GPS was, which is the group that created the so-called Steele dossier. Now, what I want to say, though, is the key point to me is they said President Trump set up a quid pro quo. And what did he do? He said, you can't have a meeting with me at the White House, President Zelensky of Ukraine. And also, we're going to hold up aid to Ukraine unless you investigate my political rival, Joe Biden. Now, that's what the Democrats have put forward as the story. That's what they want you to believe. But how can you decide who's telling you the truth? Well, let's see. Did President Zelensky get a meeting at the White House? Answer, yes, he did. Did Ukraine ultimately get the aid that had been held up for a period of time? Yes, they did. Did they have to open a new investigation into Joe Biden in order to get that? No, they didn't. So where is the quid pro quo? If there's a quid pro quo, it's the most unsuccessful quid pro quo that I've ever seen. Because they didn't get the quid. They didn't get the this for that. Quid pro quo, this for that.
Are they going after him because it was what they would call an attempted quid pro quo?
It was an attempted shakedown by the President of the United States. Meanwhile, everybody that testified about it, including Sondland, said President said directly, I don't want a quid pro quo. I don't want anything from Ukraine. Just tell them to do the right thing, to do whatever they think they ran on, which was supposed to be fighting corruption. President Zelensky, that's one of the things he ran on. Now, in Ukraine, that's an issue that you can use pretty much every election cycle because apparently Ukraine's one of the most corrupt countries in the world. They just have an endless amount of corruption there, it seems. And so every election cycle, you can say, I'm wanting to fight corruption, and people are like, please, would somebody fight corruption in this country because it is so corrupt here. But think about this. The call summary, which we've all seen, with the transcript of the call, completely eviscerates what the whistleblower said. So where was the whistleblower getting his information from? And why is he coming with this highly partisan attack on the president? And why can't we call that person before Congress? Because that person hasn't been involved yet, and the name has not even been allowed to be mentioned. But now we've got this sort of accelerated process. We had the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, which Adam Schiff is chairing now. It used to be chaired by Congressman Nunes. Now Nunes is the ranking member, but Adam Schiff has been chairing that. They've had their public hearings. They haven't gotten the testimony that they really needed to push this forward. They haven't even put together a report. They haven't voted on a report. In other words, what you might call an indictment. And nevertheless, there are letters flying over the holidays from Jerry Nadler, who's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, giving President Trump these deadlines, a deadline of yesterday, and then another deadline of later this week to say, like, first yesterday's, are you going to participate in the proceedings? And by participate, by the way, we mean we're not going to really let you do anything. We just want you to come and sit there or send your lawyer so that we can legitimize the process and say, we gave you due process. See, you had a lawyer there who was present, and you had the opportunity to testify and participate. Never mind, it's undermining the entire history of American jurisprudence, the idea that you're innocent until proven guilty, that you don't have to testify in your own defense, that the state has to prove its case, that you don't have to participate. But anyway, he said, you got to tell us by yesterday, December 1st, whether you're going to, and he called it, exercise the privileges that we've offered you to participate. And then by this Friday, you've got to tell us whether you want to call any witnesses. And then we'll have a hearing on those witnesses on next Monday, which will be December 9th. And we'll decide whether or not you get to call those witnesses. Now, guys, what do you think? I mean, do you think they're going to let them call the witnesses they want to call? No, they're not going to, just like Adam Schiff didn't. Where's the due process? This has never had any due process. The Republicans, President Trump, they've never even been able to call any witnesses. This is a total sham. Let's talk a little about Biden when we come back.
We're back on the Morgan Streetman Show, and you have to hear what Morgan Streetman is going to tell us about Joe Biden. Some more
this
juicy
is hilarious.
stuff. Yes.
This is hilarious. And I apologize. There are so many stories, Pat George, we were talking during the break. There are so many stories we could cover. We could talk about what happened in London with the knife attacks. You know, the guy they let out early. You promise you won't do it again? I mean, he was already a terrorist.
Well, they took care of him.
Well, yeah, but anyway, not before he took care of a few innocent people. And do you remember who actually took care of him? It was the citizens. It was a Polish chef with a narwhal tusk. It was another guy who grabbed a fire extinguisher and sprayed him with a fire extinguisher. And there was a third guy who tackled him and took the knife away. This is all before the police shot him. You might say, well, why if he didn't have the knife, why did they shoot him? Because he had on that fake suicide vest, which as far as they knew was real. So they shot him to stop him, hopefully, from detonating that. Okay, but we said we weren't going to talk about that. So now, one thing I do want to hit on, though, is Joe Biden. And this guy is just absolutely, I mean, it's comedic.
Malarkey.
Malarkey. No more malarkey. That's his new phrase. And then he bites at his wife's finger. I mean, like he's a gerbil.
I'm trying to find that video.
Oh, you can't find it?
I'm not yet.
Oh, you search Joe Biden bites wife's finger. No, bites wife's finger, something like that. But okay, now you've got us potted up, right? And by potted up, I mean you've got the volume turned up. Okay, we don't mean any of that other stuff. No. All right, so we've got this potted up for Joe Biden. Now, this is the same thing in Delaware that he was speaking at when he told the corn pop story. You remember the corn pop story about the guy, who was African-American at the pool, and Biden said, you can't go in the pool because you got pomade in your hair, and didn't let him in the pool, and Corn Pop took heavy offense at that, and then came out with rusty straight razors as Biden was exiting his work. There's a picture of Joe Biden at his wife's finger.
Oh, my God.
I mean, he's like a ferret. All right. So this at the same event where Biden told the now famous corn pop story, which if you haven't heard that one, you got to go out and listen to that one. Listen to this other story that he told. And I mean, is this creepy or what? This is real. This is not cut together. This is absolutely 100% real. It's a story about children rubbing his legs and then getting in his lap. And you got to listen to this. I mean, this guy is completely off his rocker. Let's see if we can get it to run here. There we go.
I saw that made me aware when I was in law school, proudly for Holloway, proudly for your dad, first African-American state senator in the state of Delaware. Everything about. And by the way, I sit on the stand and it get hot. I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They'd look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap. And I tell you what, the men, they're now all men, the guys I work with down here, and they're all guys at the time. They're all good men. Most of them made an awful lot of themselves. And Earl Larkin had a rough time. And some of you knew Earl. I came back as a public defender.
Now, do you really think this guy could ever seriously be president? He can't even keep a train of thought. Where did the roaches come from? Is he talking about kids as being roaches? I mean, where did the roaches come from? He learned all about roaches. Hopping in his lap, kids in his lap, love kids in his lap, rubbing his leg, rubbing the hair down. The hair turns blonde because he's in the sun too much. I mean, this guy is completely off his rocker.
I think he has the basics of storytelling down pat, but he's not putting them together cohesively. Like he's like, okay, sensory details, that's the mark of a good story. So he's talking about the hair on his leg, the analogy of roaches, but none of it makes sense. He needs a overall strategy or, action of the story, going from where to where.
Now, do you think President Trump really needs the Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden so he could beat Joe Biden? Are you kidding me? Can you imagine Joe Biden on a stage with President Trump talking about stuff like this? I mean, President Trump would eat his lunch in a debate stage. Remember what President Trump did to Hillary Clinton on the debate stage? He will absolutely eat Joe Biden's lunch, or as Joe Biden likes to put it, I'll beat him like a drum. No malarkey. I'll beat him like a drum. All right, so I don't think there's any real risk. It's just amazing to me how Biden has persisted. And, of course, he's done this almost his entire career. I mean, this is not new. It's being amplified with his age. But he's been full of gaffes his entire career. I mean, he was known for gaffes beforehand. And he's got all these problems with his family, all this, pay-to-play type of stuff where, hey, you want to make deals with the federal government? I'm the point guy in your country. Make sure my son gets a cushy job, makes $83,000 a month for doing what? What was he doing? He didn't know anything about energy sector. Apparently, all he knows about is cocaine and strippers. That's what he spends all his time on.
Speaking of doing anything, do we remember anything that Biden did when he was vice president?
No. He just tried to hang around and hope like some of Obama rubbed off on him. That's all he did that I can remember. So anyway, you've got, and you think about it. I mean, is the rule now that the Democrats seem to want to put forward is that there's no basis for ever having a political rival investigated for anything they ever did? Is that the rule now? I mean, so all you got to do to protect yourself from criminal investigation is to run against the other person? I mean, is that true? Because that's essentially what they're saying. They're saying it's completely wrong to ask Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. Well, wait a minute. What if Joe Biden and his family were highly corrupted? What if they were grifters? What if they were taking money from a Ukrainian company for political influence? Is that not something that we, the people, want to know about? What if he was using his office as vice president to enrich his family?
Doesn't that sound like it has more legs to it than Trump's problem?
It sounds like it's got more hairy blonde legs to it than Trump's. Absolutely it does. I mean, Trump's problem is completely fabricated, but you see how they try to turn it around on you? And that reminds me of another strategy of propaganda and the rules for radicals. Accuse your enemy of the things that you are doing. So Joe Biden actually was corrupt, and the entire Obama administration, by extension, was corrupt in Ukraine. So now they accuse President Trump of being corrupt in Ukraine as kind of a defensive mechanism. That's pure propaganda, and that's what they're doing.
It's also what you do if your spouse is cheating and they're accusing you. They're cheating, but they're accusing you of cheating. That's usually a bad sign.
Yeah, right. And then it's just like, oh, well, this is just you're just accusing me because I accused you first. Well, no, I'm accusing you because you actually did it, right? Mm-hmm. You accused me first as a defensive mechanism. We frankly see that in the practice of law. At least I do a good bit. I see people, whenever you start accusing me of something that I didn't do, I'm thinking that's probably what you did.
Yes.
That's probably exactly what you did because you're trying to set it up so that when I actually catch you having done what you really did, now the judge can't figure it out because it looks like, two children fighting.
Classic projection.
Yep. He punched me first. No, he punched me first. Oh, children, behave. Well, all right. Now, we did want to talk about something else, and we'll try our best to get through some of it. But that is the Federal Reserve and what has happened to the economic situation in our country, because it seems to me that things are out of control. And everybody who listens to this show knows that I'm a committed capitalist. I'm a free enterprise guy, and I believe in capitalism. But we are now living in a situation that is almost unprecedented. It's not completely unprecedented, but it's almost unprecedented. And we'll tell you when it happened once before. But right now, can you believe, think of this statistic, this fact, okay? The bottom 90% of America, so 9 out of every 10 people in this country, in total, own the same amount as the top 1/10 of 1%.
90 out of 100, right?
More than that. That's 90 out of 100. Well, 90 out of 100
right.
Own the same as 1 out of 1,000. Think about that. Those numbers are absolutely staggering, that the top 1/10 of 1% own the same amount of assets as the bottom 90% of our country.
Aggregate.
Yeah, 300 million people own the same as about 300,000 people. I think if I'm running the numbers right.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's just absolutely unbelievable, right? The wealth gap, the distribution of wealth, and you might say, well, this is because of capitalism. And no, it is not.
Well, what is it?
This is because of the Federal Reserve bank system and the fiat money system that we're currently operating under. Now, remember, the Federal Reserve was passed by a voice vote in Congress. Now, a voice vote is where they don't even count, right? And who knows how many people were even there, because you know when it passed? December 23rd of 1913. So do you imagine there were a lot of Congress people? Don't forget they're taking off next Thursday, and they don't come back until the new year. So how many do you think are there on December 23rd? Could it be like 3 or 4? Well, we had a voice vote. Everybody who was here, we had a voice vote,
and they didn't
even
have tape recorders back then, so there's really no proof.
There's no proof. There's no record. And you can read all about this in a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island, which gets into the founding of the Federal Reserve and how it was essentially a conspiracy among very powerful moneyed interests to create a Bank of the United States, which had been created a couple of times before, but was heavily opposed by people, including Andrew Jackson. Remember, he got shot because of it at one point. They tried to kill him because he opposed the Bank of the United States. But they eventually got it passed, and that was in 1913. And ever since then, our entire monetary system has gone haywire, and it's built on itself, of course, because, when President Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971, which had been put in place by the Bretton Woods Agreement, when it took us off the gold standard, which governed, at least kept some restrictions on the amount of money that they could print, now there are absolutely no restrictions on the amount of money that they can print. And we've seen this. We've seen what they did, where they did the TARP program, the $30 trillion printed up and handed out. Now, of course, they didn't actually print it. It's all numbers on a screen. But that happened in 2008 or so to try to fix the financial crisis. And you look at what that did to the wealth of the bottom 50% as compared to the middle 40% and the top 10%. The bottom 50% took that one right on the chin.
I know we're up against a break, but I want to know, Morgan, your opinion. What would a more socialistic direction do to these numbers?
Well,
because they want to argue, the AOCs and Elizabeth Warrens, that it would help.
I think it would exacerbate the problem. Absolutely. I think it would exacerbate the problem. It would make things worse. What we've got to get control of is monetary policy and the disconnection between money and reality. What is money but a piece of paper or a promise? It's debt. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back.
Back on the Morgan Streetman Show, Roxanne Wilder here, Pat George. Of course, we want to go out there, but Pat George can't stop laughing at this photo.
I'm sorry. I had to apologize to Morgan while we're off the air because
Right.
he saw me laughing, and it's just because I still have the picture of Biden.
Biden biting.
Yeah, and the more you look at it, and you go, well, that's strange. But if you keep it up there, it just really looks strange that you have to go out there and find that picture.
Is that one of those things you think he was trying to show what a relatable, here's a little shot of me and Jill, peel the curtain back, and this is our, canoodling behind the
Gosh, I don't
scenes.
know
We want
what
to
it-
show everybody.
I don't know. Maybe he thought she was feeding him the little soft bananas that he eats.
He looks like he's confused.
You think that guy could be president? You think a guy like that? I mean, put him in a room with Putin, right? What's going to happen? He's going to nibble on Putin's fingers?
I think it's the end of Biden.
Yeah. Well, anyway, you just wonder why they think that you would believe that we need to do some kind of investigation in the Ukraine to beat this guy. President Trump doesn't need to do anything to beat this guy. Will beat himself.
And he doesn't need to show up at the hearing. They invited him.
Oh,
there.
I think not. I think that's a bad. You just give it legitimacy, and the whole thing has been illegitimate from the get-go. So they're already laying out the hearings that they're going to have and the procedures. They haven't even gotten the report from the Intelligence Committee, right? They haven't even gotten the report yet. So how do they know what the report's going to say? How do they know it's going to say they should proceed? I mean, Adam Schiff, as of when he finished the public hearings, he said he had to consult with his colleagues. He didn't know yet whether or not they should impeach. Well, if you got to the end of your hearings and you didn't know yet, I would say that's a pretty good indicator that you didn't get the evidence you thought you might get or that you need to move forward.
Mm-hmm. It's just it's just craziness. And not only that, he's off doing things and getting things done.
Exactly.
While the impeachment is taking
and Congress won't pass the U.S., Mexico, Canada free trade agreement, right? The one that replaced NAFTA. They won't even take that up for a vote. They're too busy goofing around on this impeachment nonsense. But I want to just say one more thing about the Fed and what has happened to our country, because there's been a huge misallocation of capital. What do I mean by that? I mean, money is being spent on things that, frankly, I don't think have value. Look at the price of Bitcoin. It's about $7,300 today. We know it's been as high as almost $20,000 at one point. Now, Bitcoin is nothing but an entry in a secure transaction register. So, yeah, it's a secure register, but all it is something on a computer that says you own this. Well, what do you own?
Does it seem like it's losing traction, though?
Maybe a little bit, but look, what's it compared to an ounce of gold? Gold exists. You can hold the gold in your hand. And in fact, get yourself an ounce of gold if you can afford it. Hold it in your hand. You kind of know what some of the ancients felt like. It's really heavy. Our friend E.B. Tucker was on. He described that. It's heavy. It's beautiful. It kind of catches the light. I mean, you've got something. You've got an asset. If I have the ounce of gold, you can't have it at the same time, Roxanne. But when we're talking about these computer things or fake money on computers, debt that's created by the Fed on computers, it's all entries in a computer. I mean, really, we don't have any control over it.
Is it just a roll of the dice?
What?
Bitcoin.
Well, Bitcoin, look, that's a longer discussion that I
You've
can't.
had those on here before.
And we've had those. And, there was a time when maybe you would have been smart to buy a little bit of it and hold it and you'd have made some money. But that doesn't mean that it is actually anything real. And what we're doing in our society now is we're rewarding things that are not real. And there's something very wrong with that.
It's what we value in society. We do value things that are intangible, that are just on our phones, pictures on a phone versus the real event that took place or the framed photo.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking about, one of the big areas of investment now, apparently, and this is one of the things I want to get to, is these video game teams where investors are actually putting money into sponsoring, first recruiting talent, then sponsoring teams to go off and play these video game competitions and win prizes, millions of dollars in prizes. And
Tampa's working on a team.
Okay, and I mean, but this is, talk about malarkey. These are video games. There's no value in video games. I mean, didn't we learn that growing up? Now, okay, you can use them as distractions, but when you're paying somebody to play a video game, and yet people who dig ditches or who build roads or who build things are barely making it in this country, barely able to earn enough to survive? Why are we so rewarding fake things and we're not rewarding real things? Why are we rewarding Bitcoin at $7,300 and we don't reward gold? Gold is $1,500. It probably should be $2,000 or $3,000 or maybe more. Some people think it should be as much as $10,000 an ounce. Why are real tangible assets not given the value that these fake assets are given? And the reason is because we're essentially living in casino land. We're living in a fake monetary system created by the Federal Reserve and this easy money policy, which they have just reinstituted. And that is causing everything to get out of whack and the money to flow into these assets or these pursuits that are not real and not tangible. And I think that's a real mistake, and that's why the rich keep getting richer and the poor and the middle class see their savings inflated away. Just see it inflated away over time. Mm-hmm. And yet people in New York City who do things like invest in video game teams, they just keep getting more Bentleys. They keep eating at nicer restaurants, only Michelin-starred restaurants, only the finest food, only the best jets to fly everywhere, and all of this stuff. And it's a misallocation of capital. We should reward real things, real effort, real assets. And this is another area, and we got very little time left for our out there, but this is another area, and this is good for those of you who are shopping, because it's Cyber Monday today. And we just had Black Friday, and a lot of you want to buy a smart TV, right? And hey, aren't they cheap? I mean, smart TVs are so cheap, and we've told you about this before. Now, why do you think they're so cheap?
Gathering information.
It's because they're gathering information on you and selling it. That's the point. That's why
they should give them away.
Well, they basically do. They give them away at cost, and then they hope to gather information on you. Now, a team of researchers from Northeastern University and the Imperial College of London examined 81 different devices and found that they all sent information, even if you didn't turn it on, even if you didn't associate it with one of your accounts. They all sent information to Google, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, etc. Even the FBI out of the Portland, Oregon field office has gotten in the mix here and given you some tips, and you ought to go out and find this. I don't think we have time to cover them all, but they say you've got to search online using the exact model number of the smart TV that you bought and words like microphone, camera, and privacy to learn how to control the features. And you also have to check and see if the features can turn themselves back on after you've turned them off, because the FBI is recommending that you turn these things off. You have no control over your information. It includes a camera. They're taking pictures of you when you're watching TV and you don't even know it. That's just absolutely insane. That's 1984. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.